quickly kind of address 3 particular points that have come up in terms of this theme. One, that there is a lack of global standard in terms of payment end-to-end, and it's culturally relevant, but it's also technologically dependent. The other is there is an opportunity cost between the legacy systems and a lack of omnichannel approach, but there is an overwhelming cost for updating payment services, at least on the merchant side specifically, precisely because most of them are not humongous retailers looking at massive global expansion. So opportunity cost. And the other is this balance between experience and security, be it fraud, be it authentication and identification, and the customer experience. And where is that actual balance? Don't know if we actually have the answers, but those are the things that really bubbled up for me during the course of the morning. And as this comes up, we'll do these questions as they pop up. But I'd like to actually start with that particular authentication and fraud versus security, or security and experience. And I think, Meirav, let's start with you, because there's a considerable opportunity cost at 21 billion for a bad experience. And yet, when we're talking about actual chargebacks and the work that has to be done, in that case, the fear of missing out is 21 billion, but the cost is 15 billion. And yet, when we're looking at some of these numbers that Richard, you shared, 88%, what was it? It was something along the lines of 55% of customers will abandon the purchase if it's a bad experience. Right. How do we balance that?
Well, I think as we all mentioned here, we need to look at the circle with the customer in the middle, right? So we're building this ring around them, and it's not one merchant's responsibility to build this ring around them. It's all of our responsibility in the room to be able to facilitate what the customer is driving forward, right? So we want to build the layers, as Richard said, a global layer that will allow all the different payment methods, all the different abilities, because if a customer will come in and will not find the right flow, the merchant will end up losing them. And we don't want that. So we want to build the layers around to facilitate everything that they need. And as you mentioned, security being one of these layers, because if we don't give a good customer experience because of our fear of fraud as a merchant, then we're going to lose this customer's lifetime value. So it has to be rings around the customer with a customer-centric approach, allowing them to go through with the transaction. So a bit of shifting into the direction of how can we make this experience a better experience for them? The right payment methods, the right currency, the right frictionless opportunity to finalize the transaction.
There's a ring theme going on, and that part of it is the business model itself in terms of, say, customer experience first, and then everything else falls into place, versus actually looking at rings of technological requirements.
It's not just about let's say, the merchant taking care of it, because not all merchants are sophisticated or have the technical capabilities to do direct integration. I think personally it's more the PSP's responsibility to provide those services as a whole to the merchants that they work with, because the PSPs are more payment professional, both understanding the chargeback process and how to actually allocate the risk limits or the fraud protection of them. So they're providing the monitoring and all those protection as a service to their merchants. By providing a unified, the merchant integrates to the payment page, and the rest is being done by the payment service provider and the technology provider he chose to work with, or their own internal systems.
Yeah, but there are some genuine merchants that have the capabilities, the wherewithal, and the appetite to manage their payment experience and their security and all the adjacencies that we talk about in terms of the consumer experience in-house. And one of the merchants that I talked of in my case study, they simply said, look, we want to sell more stuff. We want to sell more stuff to an increasing addressable market, and we want to maintain our margins. And that really was a very simple takeaway for me, because it gave me focus. And as payment professionals, it's our duty of care to facilitate that consumer experience by also enabling the consumer to pay with their preferred payment with a tolerable, and I think that's the key, the tolerable level of risk. Because we have too draconian in our risk management platform. we're going to repel and turn away good customers. So it is about finding that sort of that balance that you talk about, the payment experience versus the consumer experience.
Well, isn't risk and compliance actually the business prevention department in most organizations?
Still called that in most places,
Exactly. But I mean, I think it's quite interesting if we're looking at merchants who have the capacity and the appetite to bring it in-house, can we actually enable others who are smaller, at a smaller scale, to do this? And I'm thinking particularly of setting up the back-end approach, where the front end is where the customization and that tweaking that's very specific to the merchant actually exists, but the back end becomes very standard, that it becomes interoperable across systems, and it allows for the merchant to actually have a bit more control, acting as their own PSP, but also other PSPs that are out there. There's a very, I don't want to say similar, but there is an understanding and standard approach that the quality, the security, the maintenance costs, and the liability distribution actually becomes a global standard. Is that something that we can actually move towards and work forward? I mean, are you seeing some examples in some of the markets you're working in of this mindset?
We see marketplaces, for example, both the requirement from Visa as well, marketplaces taking internally the payment gateway and the distribution between the sub-merchants they're providing the services to. And they're taking that approach, managing some of the rings function and some of the control over the sub-sellers within those marketplaces. For small merchants or mid-merchants, taking the back-end solution won't be the case. It's not, let's say, counterproductive, and it's more expensive to go that way. But then partnering with the right PSPs to offer those, or multiple PSPs, all catering for different territories or different segments that they want to work with.
And I think the key to what he said is partnering. It's about choosing the right partner, as you said, in the front end and the back end, and make it all work together end to end. And I think this is where they can actually focus on their core competence and choose the partners to bring them forward and to make sure that they can adapt to anything that's coming in the future.
So talking about the future, if we're looking at alternative payment methods and the reliance on, in particular, we're looking at e-wallets and mobile and contactless as alternative methods, how do we actually start to accommodate for everything under the sun? And my question actually is, should we start to accommodate for every alternative payment method that comes up under the sun? And I ask this in part because I understand behavior from a cultural and market perspective is one thing. But is there perhaps a benefit in rationalizing the number of different types of payments? Because we can actually then have better control over the security or the encryption and tokenization of this. There does become a standard. And we then actually can start to scale in terms of this interoperability and the technology interoperability. Should we be catering to everything that the customer wants?
That's quite a thought-provoking question and statement, and I think there's good grounds for trying to achieve a level of globalization in terms of standardization. But to several of the panelists' slides, we were talking about great diversity and difference within consumer behaviors. I mean, UK, Ireland, Sweden, Germany, the United States, LATAM. I think globalization in terms of rationalizing APMs is a utopia that I don't frankly see us ever achieving, because there's so many different levels of consumer behavior on a global level.
Well, I'll argue that over the course of time, and as an economist, that most things are rationalized precisely because of the cost. And irrespective of the novelty of some of these payment methods, we still have to roll it back to the security of them, the reliability, and the real-time processing capability that we have for them. And I will go back and say, customer experience does require some friction as well in order to be fully informed and grant proper consent. So why, and this is, maybe it's an existential question, but why should we care so much that the customer gets what they want when we actually have to make sure that every party in the transaction is protected and has security and data privacy, and that there is there's an authentication and authorization of the actual transaction at each step? Should we really be advocating for everything the customer wants, or should we be advocating for the best approach to this system?
I think that we should focus on what we do best. and not in order to to give the client everything what he needs. Just out of the very simple thing is that if I'm offering a customer 5 or 6 solutions, he wants to have a 7th and an 8th one, a 9th one. And we need to focus in order to bring the security for our merchants, for our partners, in order to increase their services and to increase also their businesses. So I truly believe that to offer all kinds of payments by the end of the day will just block us in order to become better, faster, and also saving costs and risks, always increasing.
So there is this notion of rationalization that makes some sense. At the same time, if we're trying to capture as many customers, the end customer, as possible, this is why I ask, maybe this is the existential question for PSPs, is do we cater to everything, every desire, or do we actually narrow that down?
I think one of the main answer to this question is, like, we as the aggregator, we use plenty of payment methods on our platform, and we would like to provide as much as we can to every shoppers in the world. But what we found out is this is two main things which will impact. The first thing is excellent customer payment experience. And the second things, which I think is having a historical impact, is the trust. So it depends on the country what kind of trust to different payment methods. Like, for example, in Russia, we are the card country. So lots of people are using cards as the preferable methods of shopping online. In China, people prefer messengers to receive salaries and to shop online with the accounts in the messengers. I think the main issue, the main reason is the trust, because when we're talking about money, it always comes with the trust. What methods will be secured, will be of course provides for us customer experience, but it will continue of transforming with so as much as the company and the aggregator will build trust with the customer, with the new customer experience, the diversity will continue, and like this.
And I think we have to remember that as a customer, payment is something on the side. When I go into my Uber, do I even feel the payment process? No, right? I get my app, I open, I get the Uber, I walk out. In the middle, maybe I had a phone call, maybe I was working. I paid, but I didn't really actively participate in it. And I think this is what we're looking to do. So it's our job out here to facilitate all of this behind the scenes so the customer can continue doing the shopping.
So this actually leads to one of the questions around thank you for the Uber. It's a nice little segue. But if we're looking at the anti-fraud market and the Uberization of anti-fraud, what's the take on that? I mean, I think you're closest to this, and Riskified is dealing with it most every day.
So definitely, I think the Uberization, the approval of these transactions, the pushing everything forward, recognizing where I am, who I am, everything done behind the scenes, everything done in real time. So if you're going to try to call me to verify something when I'm in a different country, you're not even going to get through sometimes because I don't have my phone on, right? But I still want to be able to facilitate everything. I landed in Milan a few weeks ago, and I realized I don't even have a wallet on me. I forgot it at home. I had 3 days in Milan. I could still do everything I could around just with my mobile. And it was great, but it was very scary when I thought I lost my wallet. So this is where we're going to end up. It's the customer moving everywhere. I want to make sure you identify it's me so I can do whatever I want.
I think it's a little funny because I also assume that I'm a typical customer, and I know I'm not, and you and I are not typical customers.
We're great customers.
Maybe you are. I'm terrible. But this actually, I mean, this is this maybe misnomer or misunderstanding of what an average customer looks like. At the same time, every single customer does need to be authenticated, and it comes down to an incredibly strong KYC process in the very beginning, right? Is that, and I'm getting the message that it's best to partner with an actual KYC company rather than a PSP trying to do that little bit by yourself. But that actually becomes the staple. Authentication, validation, and authorization are required for every single transaction, irrespective of it being 2 pence, €5, or 100 million ruble.
But when I understand why I need to share my information, so I'm willing, there's always a balance here, right? I'm willing to share my information if I will get the experience that I want. So I'll be happy for you to track certain things that I do in order for me not to get stuck in Milan when I don't have my wallet, right? So I think this is where it needs to be. There's the balance of needing to identify me with a balance of keeping privacy.
And it's an interesting balance to try to strike in light of GDPR and our understanding of what privacy around data actually means. And it's not the fact that it's private data, it's the fact that it actually has commercial value. And we're starting to educate the general consumer about the power of privacy in terms of the commercialization of their personal data for themselves rather than for other corporates. And there's something around that balance there. This is quite interesting. I'd actually like to go to the competition in PSPs, because we'll get to the Russian market in a minute. But the competition in PSP World keeps growing. So what features does a payment service provider actually have to bring to market in order to win the share? What are some of those basic feature functionalities that are basic? And I'll call those the global standards at this point. What's a global standard?
I actually see it because it's no longer a pricing core anymore. It used to be one sells for 1.5, the other 1.7. I'm saving some money. But today it's the value-added service. It's more the APIs, the capabilities of embedding some additional functionality in the payment flow to existing websites or application. The turn to mobile. Because of mobile shopping is a lot increasing from year to year, giving the ability to embed smart payments and all the routing logic behind the scenes based on API makes it more, let's say, likelihood that sophisticated merchants will come and work with this, let's say, an API-oriented PSP, giving them e-commerce capability for the small merchants, the moms and pops shops. They don't have the ability to start setting up a Shopify shop, but just need a landing page for 1 or 2 products. The consultants in the market that are looking to send a link to their customer just to pay by credit card and such. All those added values which in terms open up the payment page to go to the transaction routing, those little things in the process is what makes the difference.
There's your answer. Richard, I think you guys
well, I totally agree with that statement that the competition in PSP World keeps growing. And I'm not identifying or seeing any change in that trend, period. And the other, how do we differentiate ourselves in the market? And I think we've done ourselves a fundamental disservice by driving our price in a way we describe a race to the bottom. 5 cents, 4 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents. And I think that might have removed some of that value. So now the shift is going to about value and features and functionality. So it's ongoing. And then it's ongoing by listening to the consumer. And by then listening to the consumer who tells the merchant and then dictates the trends that then forwards that on to us as solution providers. So is it smart routing? Is it now the ability now to undertake a push payment through the open banking platforms? It's providing feature and functionality that fundamentally addresses that very simple statement that I made earlier. As a merchant, I want to sell more stuff. I want to sell more stuff to an increased addressable market, but I need to maintain my margins. So it's a constant listening and a loop between us as payment professionals and the merchant, the community, and the consumer.
Well, I want to actually bring this question in. Why should an expanding merchant use you? Because again, I go back to this notion of we're assuming a lot of things about the general nature of merchants. And if we talk about the diversity of payment types, let us talk about the diversity of types of merchant, right? That is exponential in number. So why isn't card and cash enough? Why do we have to serve everything? Or should a merchant, an expanding merchant or emerging merchant, actually consider future-proofing, knowing that card and cash may have a time limit, but let's also be honest, they probably have a time limit as well. So why should they make the investment in accepting a number of different payments or enabling that?
I think the card and cash is enough for someone working locally and not working globally. When you expand your activity to different territories, as Richard showed in his presentation, the adoption of different payment methods in different territories makes it different to add additional payment method if you're expanding to another territory. Working all over the place might not make a difference to add as many payment methods as possible, because you won't be consuming all of them to make it worth your while in terms of the amount, the cost that you have per payment method sometimes. But when you target a specific territory and you need that, you check which payment method over there, the alternative one against credit cards and cash, then you say, okay, I'm expanding another payment method, I'm expanding to another territory, I'll add another one and another one and another one. So saying, let's say, clearly people didn't travel enough to see that you get to places that you can't pay with the credit card sometimes, and it's a problem, or with the credit card that you were issued won't work there and you have to transfer funds to another wallet. It's, if you're a world traveler, you see the experience that you get stuck sometimes.
And again, I think we're a little bit myopic in our own views, partly because we all do spend a lot of time traveling the globe. But if you're a merchant and you're a small merchant that doesn't necessarily worry about cross-border because your market is, being on every corner shop in a particular city, and having a bunch of local bodegas, do we really care that I can do contactless, or I can do mobile, or I can do e-wallet, or eventually I can actually take some form of crypto or whatever it happens to be? Do I care, and should I care?
I think that merchant should desperately care, because I think there will be disenfranchising an ever-increasing number of consumers from the ability to buy in their preferred payment method, whether that's domestic or cross-border. So in a way, they're self-limiting their growth.
Give us a timeline on when you think we're going to have to make the transition, when merchants will have to accept that multi-alternative payment methods need to be in place.
Generally, without sounding flippant, I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yes,
Right.
because even a local merchant doesn't sell just to the local people. They'll see tourists coming in, and not all of them will have the cash, not all of them will have the credit card, but you see Chinese tourists all over. They want to pay in the same method that they do back home, even if they're in Milan right now. So it's critical to cater to that as well, even if you're a one shop in your own city.
So basically, get on board or
Get on board
do a
and choose
liquidation
the
sale.
partner that you want to get on board with, and make them show you why you need to get on board. Make them show you the ROI for getting on board. That's part of, I think, your partner's job in order to bring you there.
So as a PSP, we should be thinking about value-added service and how to offer each of those concentric rings of importance, from onboarding to fraud to finance and security, etc. We should be looking at some sort of potential global standard, or maybe it's already emerging on its own based on what technology can enable and some of the best practices. And at the end of the day, we've got to understand there will always be a fine line between convenience and experience, and that opportunity cost of a bad experience, and the notion of having fraud prevention, risk mitigation, and security in place that makes the customer confident that they can trust this particular transaction, and the merchant trust that the transaction will go through and they'll actually get the revenue from that particular sale. So that's the lay of the land for PSPs. I want to thank each of you, Richard, Meirav, Denis, Chris, Eliad, for being with us. I also want to remind you that you have an opportunity to corner each one of these people. You know what they look like? You can take the opportunity to ask them individual questions during the break that's coming up. And if you have felt overwhelmed this morning and not yet recovered from your previous evening's activities, the room is thin for a reason. There is a brain recharging session that Merchant Payment Ecosystem is offering. You'll find more information inside of your little booklet. But if you need a chance to take a mental break, refresh, recharge, reboot, just like your phones need the battery charged, I urge you to do that. We will come back at around 11:15 to start with talking about infrastructure and PSP infrastructure for 2019 and what that looks like in the future. In the meantime, enjoy your break. Thank you for having been with us this morning. Thank you.